considering the data that has already been published on the criminal prosecutions, plural, happening against him, the odds of him not being convicted on at least some of them are pretty slim. And if we also, of course, take into consideration that at least some of these prosecutions are, of course, politically motivated, the odds of him not being convicted on at least some of them drop to, well, let's not say absolute zero, but to use a term from mathematics, they asymptotically tend towards zero. So under these circumstances, it would be quite difficult to believe that Trump, with at least some criminal convictions on his record, can win a general election. Now, can he win the Republican nomination? Yeah, sure. Can he be a competitive candidate in the general? Yeah, sure. But unless he's going to face Joe Biden, I find it very difficult to believe in a Trump re-election at this point. But as I was telling you earlier, I'm also not a big fan of discussing American general election politics a year and something before. Ask me the same question after the first Super Tuesday or something.
Okay, but I think I can ask you something around this issue about American culture. Here in Eastern Europe, if something like this would happen to a political candidate, everyone on the street would be like, yeah, he's being politically persecuted. Yeah, do you think Americans do the same?
No, Americans have not been red-pilled yet on the degree to which governmental corruption is possible. Now, that's not to say that Americans don't understand corruption. Of course they do. But they don't understand the depths to which corruption can go in a governmental institution. Now, you have to remember, we in Europe, and not just Eastern Europe, all of Europe, we've been through a lot of fucked up shit. We've been through fascism, absolutist monarchy, constitutional monarchy, in Eastern Europe, communism as well, and now post-communism, which is a mixture of the two. Theocracies here and there, yes. Whereas in the United States, the current constitutional setup, framework, is the nation. They've never had a change of the regime. So as a result, they have to believe that the current constitutional framework at least sometimes works. And they haven't had the historical experience to use as a reference point. In Eastern Europe, we can say...
The Civil War, maybe?
Yeah, the Civil War, but even there, the constitutional framework won. So there is no historical reference point of a different framework of organizing society in which certain elements of corruption happen. So for instance, let's take the example of Romania. When something really weird happens, there is always some correspondent, either during the times of communism, either Ceausescu or Dej, or the Carlist dictatorship in late 30s, or the constitutional framework of the 1920s and early 30s, or Karl I, the United Principalities. There is some correspondent to which you can say, well, yeah, this happened before, this is how deep it goes, here's how you can fix it. There is some framework, some reference point in history. In the United States, for some aspects, yes, there is a reference point, but for others, not so much. So for instance, deep corruption within the judiciary going from the DOJ all the way down to district county judges in big cities, yeah, they don't have an experience for that. Corrupt judiciary happened in the past, but it was usually portions of it. Either the Supreme Court went haywire, or the DOJ went crazy, or the local county judges had been bought off by the mafia. So these things happened in the past. But generalized corruption, not
FDR,
really.
maybe?
Yeah, I guess during FDR, but even during FDR was threatening to pack the Supreme Court.
He didn't actually do it.
He didn't actually do it. And secondly, even during FDR, there were local state judges and appellate judges who would stand against the administration. It was never a unidirectional type of corruption. Maybe it isn't the case now either, but I would argue that it is far more corrupt today than during the times of FDR. And the vast majority of Americans don't understand this, and they can't understand it, at least until it happens at least once, so they can learn the precedent. So as a result, I find it very difficult to believe that a significant portion, a majority of American, or at least a majority of American voters, would end up adopting, in a few months really, the belief in Eastern Europe, yeah, it's politically motivated BS, we're going to still vote for him.
I have a difficulty on a podcast. I go into the Arshcast, and there's this other YouTuber, Short Fat Otaku.
Okay.
He's Canadian, and I tried to explain this level of corruption to him, and I'm saying like, but you believe it happens in Russia? And he's like, yes. But like, Why don't you think it can happen in America? Because America is different.
Yeah, well, to be fair, he should know better because he's Canadian. I mean, in Canada, it's already worse than Eastern Europe.
He doesn't believe it.
It's worse than Eastern
He
Europe.
doesn't believe it. He refuses to believe it.
There you go.
He will
Yes.
say that the system will prevail, justice will happen in the end.
Yeah,
and
it's that kind of naivete that is very specific to young nations. And both Canada and the United States are young nations. I mean, the United States is what, 250 years old, give or take? Not enough time to learn all of these things.
Even after the trucker protest, they don't realize that it's a problem. Right now, there's a new legislation in Canada regarding
Registering podcast platforms.
registering
Yeah, I've
podcast
heard that.
platforms. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly how the things used to be back in communism here. You would have to register your typewriter, you would have to register all of your independent activities, and if you failed to do it, you'd get shut down and maybe you'd go to Gulag.
But
Okay, I'm
not even that.
exaggerating.
If you started writing against the state, all of a sudden your license gets removed.
Of course.
Because a lot of people don't get it. It's like, okay, so you just submit your data to the government and that's it. And the government, if they issue a license, they can withdraw a license.
Of course.
And when they withdraw the license, you're not allowed to have your podcast.
Now, of course, they sweetened the deal a little bit, according to the official page of the modernizing of the framework of media, or something like that it's called in Canada. And they said, no, only the platforms have to register, not individual users. So if I host my podcast on Spotify, for instance, Spotify has to register.
Yeah, but then if Joe Rogan says some shit.
Yeah, I know, you're absolutely correct.
Then
But
Spotify is going to be told either you fix Joe Rogan or your license gets removed. I mean, it's just...
Of course, it's crazy, but it's part and parcel of Canada. I mean, Canada has been a totalitarian hellhole for more than 25 years, and it has gotten progressively worse. I mean, it's not just Trudeau. That's another aspect that even right-wing Canadians don't understand. Yes, Trudeau is absolutely terrible, and yes, he's in bed with the Chinese spies and all of that, and yes, he's being blackmailed by the Indian organized crime syndicates through,
I didn't know that.
through NDP.
How can people find more about that?
Well, look up who that guy that was recently assassinated in Canada. There was an Indian guy who was assassinated. It's a big scandal in Canada, actually. Look up who he was, and then look up who is related to who he was related to, and then look up Mrs. Joy, which is Trudeau's mistress, because of whom he's now going through a divorce. And look up what Mrs. Joy did in relation to another India-related terrorist attack in the 1980s and to Pierre Trudeau. And then look up who the guy that runs the NDP is and who his friends are. It's very easy. Most of it is public information. Yeah, sure, you're not going to find it on CBC. But if you look the correct names on YouTube, you'll find Indian podcasts talking about that. And yeah, of course, it may be difficult to understand their English from time to time. But for the most part, most of this is public information. So yes, Trudeau is a terrible leader. But he's just the last in a long streak of leaders who are either weak or intentionally malevolent. So I'm not surprised at all that these things are happening in Canada. And who are Canadians going to vote for? Well, that guy from CPC. Now, don't get me wrong, I like his ideas, but
I think they would vote for Trudeau again if they could.
Yeah.
If Trudeau could run another term, they would vote for him.
Well, he can. I mean, it's a parliamentary system. Trudeau can be.
All right, that's a good point.
Prime Minister for 25 years.
Yeah, I keep
no
forgetting
term
there's a different system. Yeah.
Yeah, there is no term difference.
They have King Charles, don't they?
Yes, in theory it's an English dominion, but not really. In practice, it's a parliamentary republic. So basically, Trudeau can be prime minister.
Do you think he will run again then?
He would be stupid not to. Because the second he loses the position as prime minister, he
gets arrested.
Deep trouble. Well, being arrested is in fact best case scenario. He might have to seek exile on his father's island in Cuba. So I'm serious. I mean, the guy is in deep trouble, both with the CCP and with the crime syndicates that run his junior partner, which is the NDP. In any event, the fact that this is happening in Canada is not surprising at all.
Do you think like this discussion would be allowed on a Canadian podcast?
Well, there is an Indian-Canadian podcast on YouTube that discusses these things. I forget the name of the channel.
But like once the law passes, do you think they will get a license?
Well, what's Canada going to do? Withdraw the license of Google? Okay, let's say they withdraw the license of Google.
No, but they can pressure Google, and Google usually complies.
Usually, but not always. At the end of the day, there are some limits that not even Google can cross. I mean, think about it this way. Let's say Google is being pressured by whatever, by Ottawa, by the administration in Canada to censor a certain Indian podcaster that discusses these things.
Looks bad.
Okay, let's say Google complies. Then what's next? What stops Mr. Modi in India to say, okay, fine, now we're going to make our own Google with blackjack and hookers and gets kicked out on the Indian market? Uh-oh. Now it's suddenly a lot more important because at the end of the day, the Indian market is far more important than the Canadian market. The Canadian market is more for prestige than for actual money. I mean, let's not forget, Canada is just about the size of Poland, in fact, even smaller than Poland in terms of population. So it's not really an important market. India, however, it's 1.5 billion people, all of them online, coming online right now. You want to touch that market because it's mostly a virgin market. So from Google's perspective, from purely economic perspective, they can afford to just tell the Ottawa administration, just buzz off, mate. No. So I don't think Google can be pressured that easily. Spotify, yes, probably, and a few others. I mean, one of the reasons I don't have Rumble yet is because for a long while they were a Canadian company, and I'm like, no, they're subjected to to Canada's hate speech laws. Therefore, I don't want a Rumble channel. Now I've heard that they've moved to the United States. Maybe I'll open a channel there.